The VIX was up 13.63%, and you know what that means. It means that in the next two trading sessions, either Friday or Monday, there is an 85% chance that we will have a bouncer bottom. We may go a whole lot lower before that bouncer bottom hits, but there is a possibility bouncer bottom in the next two trading sessions. Again, when it doesn't work is when the VIX starts going parabolic. The risk is right now. Earnings season had the Fed. You have these tops, bottoms, and continuations surrounding the Fed. There are geopolitical risks right now. We're seeing tensions heat up in the Middle East. As I'm speaking right now, we're seeing ships being moved by the U.S. over into the Middle East. Pentagon has announced that in the next 3 days, it was late yesterday, that Iran and its allies are going to launch a attack on Israel. Again, there's a risk of there's concerns, a lot of talk about a regional war again. And I have no idea. I'm just letting you know that we have another geopolitical issue. Sometimes these things, rattle the market. Other times they don't. Russia invaded Ukraine. It rattled the market initially, and then the market ignored it. The market started selling off as Israel is about to move into Gaza. Then they did it, and the market bottomed and ignored it. So I don't know if this is one of those issues or not. Sometimes we see other geopolitical issues rattle the market for a little while. I have no idea, but I would be derelict in my duty if I did not tell you, hey, there's this geopolitical issue rattle markets. I don't know. I wanted to give you a heads up on that. There are tensions in the Middle East. The United States is moving more ships, over into the Middle East. Does that rattle the market? I have no idea. Again, if the VIX starts going parabolic, that's when the bouncer bottom doesn't work. When it starts going parabolic, you get a dynamic and you start moving into a free fall and the VIX starts soaring, then all bets are off. It doesn't work. But want to be watching. Sometimes the VIX will top before the S&P bottoms. They might still both move. The S&P still might move to a new low. VIX might make a new high. Be watching to see if they diverge at some point. 85% chance of a bouncer bottom Friday or Monday. 15% chance that it doesn't work. Based on probability. Support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, if you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel. You could take a moment to do that. I would really, really appreciate it. Follow the link below to take you to a secured site. You could donate any amount you want. Make it a recurring donation, but I do need your help in order to make it work because I don't want sponsors to sell you stuff. I just want to share my charts with you. It takes a lot of time and effort to do this, so please consider helping out today. Thank you for your consideration for that. Look, I want to tell you again, I'm watching this trend line. We're hitting this trend line on the S&P. Told you got a shot at a bottom at these levels or a little bit lower. See that little bit lower level video all the way through. But right now we're at this trend line, and right here we formed a 9 count and a 13. You had a 13 and a 9 double sequence count a signal. Now that could just give us a bounce and we can resume the selling. Like over here, we just got a bounce and we resumed the selling, or it could try to mark a reversal with this level. So I'll be watching the trend line here. I'll be watching to see what becomes of these counts. Just because you get a bullish signal doesn't mean it's a bottom. You just get a bounce. Risk of more downside. I think you got a good shot of a bottom. You need to see evidence of that. I wanted to make you aware of that here on the 60-minute chart. 30-minute chart, we got a 9 count, very similar. But again, it just may be a short-term bounce. We'll be watching that trend line of support that I just showed you on the 60-minute chart of the S&P. Now quickly, the S&P got a green candlestick reflecting momentum yesterday, but we stalled, filling the gap, and that was around the 20-period moving average on the S&P. Really doing what Bitcoin kind of did. It attempted to rebound, but it still went to lower levels. We got a bullish buy signal there, but it's unconfirmed. And the signal's momentum, the momentum line's still bearish. The bar is reflecting the trend turned back to red. Again, it still may be we get another push down towards our 100-period moving average like we did over here before we see bottom. Now, we are slightly breaching the trend line. We are hitting the trend line of support right there. Again, signals remain bearish. Could try to bottom with either a higher low or, again, another push down. I think we're probably going to get another push down in all likelihood. Before the selling happened, about the signals, the sell signals up here, and that was followed by the sell signal marking the trend reversal. Shaded area told us, hey, something was getting ready to happen, and it did. Could still form a divergence down here with momentum, still negative. And again, the rally, everybody, oh, it's over yesterday. People that told us it was never going to happen. And you got a shot at a bottoming process. It may not be done yet. breach these levels of support and you take out the 100 period, you're going to get a much bigger sell-off. Institutions have to decide to let it go back up. And if they don't choose to do that, then we're going to go a whole lot lower. Got the bucks behind them. People get so emotional yesterday. It's over, it's over. And then they move back down today. People get emotional. Signals remain bearish when the signals turn back to bullish, when momentum turns back to bullish, and then that's validated by the trend, like we saw back over here, then you'll have a bottom. Right now, the signals remain bearish. You got a bullish signal, but it's unconfirmed at this time. You got warning signs of a possible bottom, but it could also just be signals that, hey, you're going to get a rally too. Short-term momentum. The P daily chart here. Signals remain bearish. Now, same thing with NASDAQ. You're getting some possible bottoming signals here, but it's unconfirmed. And again, it may just be a momentum signal, but here you got a bullish buy signal, but it has to be confirmed. We got to see momentum turn bullish and then eventually the trend signal. That's what happened over here. It was confirmed, momentum turned bullish, and eventually the trend signal turned back to bullish. Again, possible bottom could be under construction. We still may move to new lows. Again, it could just be a momentum move. Signals remain bearish with both momentum and with the trend. Again, back when we got the 9 count sell signal on the daily time frame on the 10th and everything, I told you about these signals that we're setting up here. We had the sell-off on the 11th. More sell signals. At that time, I thought we had a top in and we were turning off those major trend lines in the weekly time frame. We saw Meta earnings. We saw it rise, but we saw semiconductors sell off. And so sell off in the market. We had Apple earnings in after hours. It's up just under 1% here, 0.84%. Being down 1.68% for the session. Then we have Amazon earnings, again, down 1.5% for the session, down 7% in after hours at the moment. Okay, the market's sharply lower. Warned you in yesterday's video that we were likely rallying up to the gap. I told you that we were going to turn at the gap fill here and gap resistance on NASDAQ. What happened? Well, we went up for 15 minutes and we moved beyond gap fill. We moved up to fill the gap just beyond it, and we sold off for a straight 5 hours straight right after that. Right around 5.5 hours, we had a late date rebound off of this trend line of support, coming back to fill the gap down here. As I told you, again, we would either come back and test this level or, again, possibly take it out. As I told you last Friday, we had this divergence, excluding the shadow, that we might try to bounce. RSI doesn't look at the shadows, it just looks at the close. As I told you back at the top, when S&P, I told you NASDAQ had already peaked on the 11th. I told you that July 10th was likely the top. It was turning off resistance and that it was going to rally up to new high, probably diverge with the S&P. The S&P moved to a higher high, forming this negative divergence here on the RSI. I talked about it at the time. NASDAQ, lower high that I was predicting at the 78.6 Fibonacci, and this followed. And again, you hear that we are likely going to reverse right here, and that is exactly what happened. Again, you got a shot. Listen to me carefully. You got a shot that a bottom is forming. If we go to a lower low, you got a shot that a bottom is trying to carve out. The institutions keep selling, and I can't make that decision. You can't make that decision. The institutions have an enormous amount of money, and their positions are massive. If they choose to keep selling, we can go all the way down to the 4,950 area. If they stop selling, you might get a bottom. Now, the Russell currently has a negative correlation with the S&P right now. It'll move to a higher high and got a divergence. If S&P moves to a lower low, another reference point of a divergence, again, it might be signaling a short-term bottom, even if we violate the trend line. Bitcoin did, got back above it. But again, we had the move yesterday with the gap higher. It turned out to be a gap and trap, at least so far, where you gapped higher, but then you moved in the other direction. You can bounce and rebound here. Then you have the gap fill scenario if we can establish this as a bottom. If we keep going, the gap and trap scenario. But amazing, amazing signals. I think you've got a shot, no guarantee, but a shot at a bottom. When we talked back over here, I told you we were going back towards major trend lines of support. These trend lines over and over again on the weekly chart mostly, daily chart. Decisions about to be made. Going to get a solid push below these levels and continue to drop down further? Are we going to try to carve out a bottom? Told you yesterday, again, we might still try to get a higher low and try to find support around that trend line. We've breached it ever so slightly again. We've now breached it 3 times with these 3 lows right here that you see on the 60-minute chart. We breached it here just a little bit, and then today we breached it again. The trend line, now not this trend line, but the longer term trend line. I'm just connecting these more recent lows. But if you go back further, again, the longer term trend line, we're slightly breaching it and hitting this trend line. So again, I'll be watching. Did we just come back and fill the gap when we try to carve out a bottom? Or are we going to get something much more uglier? But again, absolutely amazing. Again, I told you to be looking for a reversal right at the gap fill, and that's exactly what happened. And let me just show you the trend line I'm talking about. Keep this one in your mind right here. S&P was down 1.37%, down 75 points today. Again, we slightly breached the trend line here. Again, this is from the October 2023 low. You've got this horizontal support directly underneath in the cloud right here, a 100-period moving average just below that. Again, it's still possible that we go up and make a new high if we attempt to fill the gaps I'm talking about before we get a bigger sell-off. Again, I can't make that decision. You can't make that decision. It's going to be the institutions that decide that. If we start breaching this level, taking out this horizontal support, signals remain bearish, you're going to get a much bigger sell-off to the 200 to the trend line. I told you with the Fed meeting that we just had, we're either going to get a bottom forming in the market, or we're going to have a continuation of the trend that will likely take us down here. If we get the continuation of the trend, again, just quickly, the Fed meetings have been calling the tops, bottoms, and continuations. Here, a top at the March meeting. Here, a bottom at the May meeting. Here, a continuation of the trend at the June meeting. Here, well, the jury's still out on that. But again, top, continuation, bottom, bottom, continuation, continuation, top, over and over again. The market is creating tops and bottoms and continuations of the trends with the Fed meetings. This is not a top because we already had a peak and we sold off ahead of the Fed. If we zoom out, and by the way, we had the chip stocks. We had a meta rally initially, but helped the market early on. But then those chip stocks and Nvidia and semiconductors just weighed down the market. I talked about earlier in the week, and I talked about yesterday. I was expecting a turn at the gap fill area for the S&P and the gap resistance there at NASDAQ. I talked about it at great length and detail in yesterday's video. You would have known into today's session, watching yesterday's video, watching those levels carefully. Again, we breached this trend line. Look, I have the 2 trend lines, one from the October 2023 low, one from the October 2022 low. If the institutions make the decision, we're going to take out this horizontal support, that we're going to get a bigger drop, seeing Nvidia break down from the trend line, we start seeing Nvidia break horizontal support, and NASDAQ does the same thing, and then we see it here on the S&P. Then the decision can be made to come down here to this 4,900 area, where, again, you've got your possible head and shoulders pattern. Okay, I don't know what the institutions are going to do, is what I can tell you, because, again, looking at probability, I'm not some fake fortune teller that can see into the future. I look at mathematically based indicators. I look at support and resistance. I'm telling you, look, recently we had the high. NASDAQ slammed in right into major resistance. We had a 9 count that very day. We had a 9 count the previous week on the weekly time frame. Odds and probability very high. The odds favored that we were going to turn off of those levels of resistance. Now we're on a level of support. So you need to be watching. Okay, yeah, we're breaching the trend line. Reaching the trend line, we could take it out a little bit more. Bitcoin did. Bitcoin took it out, but then got back above it and still went back up to test the highs. It's getting a lower high and reversing now, diverging with the S&P. If the S&P goes higher, it might get another reference point of a divergence, which is what marked the 2022 top. What I'm trying to tell you is that, again, seeing the real breakdown with NASDAQ and Nvidia, semiconductors, maybe we don't fill those gaps. I have the guts to tell you exactly what I think. I think we're probably going to do it. I think we can carve out a bottom. But I also told you at the top, again, we could just move into free fall and come back to the 200 period, and just get sell like today. We just had straight 5.5 hours of selling. See something like that, and if you start breaking these levels of support, my signals remain bearish, it can go a whole lot lower. I think that we'll probably try to bounce? Probably. I think the odds favor it, but there's no guarantee. Again, we're not trying to predict the future. Oh, we can see into the future. We're looking at probability, okay? And I had the guts to tell you back up at the top, the divergences in the weekly time frame, NASDAQ slamming into those levels of resistance, and I told you the day after it peaked on the 11th, we started to get the CPI sell-off that, hey, it was likely in with that 9 count. Everybody on the internet, social media, yesterday, they're, oh, it's over. And then we get this sell-off today, which is what I told you. Look for those reversals off the gap fill and gap resistance off NASDAQ, because I'm just looking at support and resistance, looking at mathematically based indicators, looking at probability. People, after a move happens, they start saying, oh, it happened, but yet they never saw it coming. Have a bear market that's coming, told there's no possible way it's going to happen, just like a recession's about to happen. I know that because I look at recession indicators, I study economic data. All the people on social media and the experts on the financial channels telling us, we're going to have the soft landing out of the Fed. And mark my words, the narrative is now going to be, and we're already starting to hear some people say it, Fed should have listened to me. They should have cut earlier. When the recession hits, you're going to hear all over the place. It needs a recession to deal with the recession issue. Policies lead to negative outcomes. And these people running around telling us we're going to have a recession and the bear market's already passed. The people that told us the 2022 sell-off was never going to happen. That's the bear market. Now we're going to rally into the new bull market until 2027 in a topping process. Before the bear market really begins to become obvious, have a topping process. I think the NASDAQ is in a topping process, but I think it has already peaked. Don't think the S&P has peaked yet. It is likely going to go back and fill the gap because it was at the very top. But again, the decision is now going to be made. I'm trying to tell you, it's not about, I know the future. I can tell you what's going to happen at 3 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to bottom out. And NASDAQ will hit 18,303. And not that kind of nonsense. I'm talking about trend lines of support. We're breaching the trend line. Okay, we are breaching the trend line. So now there's a risk of a bigger sell-off. Okay, trend lines break all the time and they redraw. We broke the trend line over here. Look at this. We broke the trend line. And I talked about this at the time. We broke this trend line. But trend lines, we had a trend line break there. But trend lines and channels expand and change all the time. That was the previous channel, and then it changed. It was a previous trend line, but then the angle of ascent, it changed. That's all I'm trying to tell you. I've been watching these Fibonacci's. We're bouncing off the 38.2 Fibonacci retracement of this advance right here. We have below that the 50% retracement, again at this horizontal support level. Then we have, again, the 61.8 Fibonacci. If we get a much bigger sell-off, we get 100% retracement. You go down to the 200 in this horizontal support. Again, that decision be made? I don't know. I think that they're going to try to create a bottom here, but our risks, we're in earnings season, moving towards a Fed pivot. So again, we start seeing the stock market sell off. In 2000, when we got the Fed pivot, the market had dropped 20%. Ahead of that Fed pivot, we got a, kind of a weak rebound for a couple weeks. Went on to see the market completely collapse. Some people are asking me about the Russell. I've been watching the Russell because the Russell's been diverging with the S&P 500. The Russell decided to go a little bit higher, bottomed out in early July here, went higher. S&P and NASDAQ went lower. Seeing a divergence, the Russell and the S&P, just like we're seeing a divergence between the Russell and Bitcoin. Now we're seeing Bitcoin top out, get a topping tail. Russell's doing the same thing. It's forming this divergence, like a parameter down here. Look at the divergence on the RSI. So again, I'll be watching to see if the Russell does in fact top here. It was down 3.29% today. We got that topping tail. The rally fizzled out yesterday. The market could try to form a bottom. Bitcoin has recently peaked. Last Monday, Bitcoin bottomed out July 5th, and like we had the bottom here in early July with the Russell, this higher low that's set up, the NASDAQ peaked on July 10th. If the Russell and Bitcoin continue their negative correlation with the market, actually it will go back to a positive correlation because they'll all go down. We move into recession. I guess it's not if, but when negative correlation continues, then we might try to see the market bottom around these support areas. I wanted to point out the Russell there. That's forming a divergence on the weekly chart. We already had the divergences on the NASDAQ and S&P with their MACDs below that 2021 top, but we diverged with the S&P at that top. We'll probably see the same thing here. That's why I still think the S&P probably go to a new high if we can carve out some type of bottom. I warned you about these divergences. We're already starting to form as we move towards a gap fill. We hit it this morning, 15 minutes of a rally and then a sell-off for the next 5.5 hours. And then, again, rebounding towards the end of the session there. But filling the gap, I told you that was going to happen. It did. Waiting game to see if we're going to get a higher low. We came back and we filled this gap. We gapped higher and we filled this gap. And let me just show you the 15-minute chart. Got a little diversions. We're trying to get a bounce there. But these divergences are just short-term price fluctuations. It's the daily and the weekly charts that call the main movements. 15-minute chart, we got a bullish MACD cross. The diversions played out beautifully. Look at that, right into that 55, 56 area. I talked about it in great length and detail in yesterday's video. And again, told you that that's where I thought we would turn, and that's where we turned. We're at this trend line. Do we break? Do we break this level, or do we carve out some kind of bottom here surrounding that trend line, just overthrowing it in the daily time frame? That again, we're likely going to see NASDAQ turn off of gap resistance, S&P off the gap fill, and again, these divergences. Here's the 5-minute chart. Went back to gap resistance, came back to the gap fill. Now we'll see, do we keep going, or do we try to carve out some type of bottom surrounding the trend line of support on the NASDAQ? 15-minute chart did the same thing S&P did. We got a bullish MACD cross at the very end of the day. Again, we diverged. I predicted Monday that we were still going to get another low, and over the weekend we talked about this. Possible this low holds, but sometimes NASDAQ and S&P diverge from one another. But is the move done? And we're coming back and filling the gap. So does this low hold from Tuesday? We turned right off a gap resistance as I predicted in yesterday's video. Again, eventually I think we're going to come back up to this level right here at the 20,400 level. So far, this is a gap and trap. And again, moving averages in the daily time frame, by the way, are in a bearish positioning. But again, people get very emotional. Oh, it's over, it's over. Told us it wasn't going to happen. Back when I had the guts up here to tell you, hey, we got this divergence going on. Let me just bring up the 60-minute chart so you can see what I'm talking about. Again, we had the diversions. We got the 9 count. We were slamming into the trend line of resistance, 2 of them on the weekly chart. And I told you, I think the top is right there. And we got that. I told you before we had the CPI sell-off that oftentimes to get good data, you could get a sell-off with the inflation data. That's exactly what happened. And I told you I thought that was the top. I thought we'd get a lower high at the 78.6 Fibonacci. We got a lower high at the 78.6 Fibonacci. Most people don't have the guts to tell you what they think. People, after we had that last week, we had the worst day that we've had since 2022. Then people start going, oh, after it happens, like today's sell-off. People with yesterday's rally, oh, it's over, it's over. Never saw the sell-off coming. I don't think it's over. I think we're carving out a bottom if the institutions, if the institutions stop selling at support. We may get another low. Nvidia still might reach the trend line and horizontal support. Look at the close. It might have reached it. Look real fast. I'm telling you, look, again, a shot that a bottom forms with the 5-leg push lower. I've got an alternative count here that we've already bottomed. Okay, we're coming down. If we start taking out that low, that gets invalidated. That this was, 3, 4, and 5. But I also have here A, B, C. And again, do not trade. Do not trade Elliott wave. It's all speculation. Use it to try to determine where prices go. It's speculation, man. Counts validated all the time. Different counts going on. Different possibilities. Because again, analysis isn't some sham, fake fortune-telling gimmick looking at support and resistance and mathematically based indicators. So again, counts can get invalidated very easily. But I'm just telling you, I'm looking for a possible 5-leg push lower. If this was 3, maybe we have ABC for 4, and then we get 5. And I told you, NASDAQ was going to turn off a gap resistance. Gee, where did it go? We went up here for 15 minutes, and then we sold off for 5.5 hours straight. It's over, it's over. Not. Okay, I think we're in a bottoming process. The bottoming process still may take NASDAQ lower. Do you have a shot at a bottom? There's no guarantee. I don't know the future. I don't think you know the future. We're all mortal. I'm just telling you, I'm looking at mathematically based indicators and support and resistance levels. Why, again, when we turned off the resistance up here and the diversions, I was able to tell you, hey, I have the guts to tell you I think there's a top. I have the guts to tell you, hey, we might form a bottom here. Maybe we get a higher low here and we turn back up, and this ends up being the bottom. Possibly. I think we can go lower if we move to the 61.8 Fibonacci on NASDAQ, horizontal support at the 18,400 area. Again, it's all about support and resistance. not about trying to predict the future. It's looking at probability, trying to make educated, informed decisions based on probability. Most people don't have the courage to tell you, hey, I think this is about to happen. Predictions are said after it has already been made. But you know, we've talked about the resistance here on that weekly chart. I continue to show you that chart multiple times a week, and we turned right off of it. So the question now is, are we going to bottom? If we do get a 5-leg push lower, we still may go down further. But right below in the mid to low 18,000 area, there's a lot of support. Now, Nvidia was down 6.67% today, down about almost $8. Again, we bounced off this 100 period. I was watching to see eventually try to come back to 97 at this horizontal support. That's where the rising trend comes in. We still may do that and find a bottom right there. Again, I continue to believe you got a pretty good shot. NASDAQ might try to bottom out and go back up and fill the gap at 20,400. July 17th gap lower, which is the same gap you have here at 126 on Nvidia. We hit 120 yesterday, and we stalled right up the 10 and 20 and the 50 period moving average directly over, or today, I should say, below those levels yesterday at the rally, up to 120 today. Still got a gap here, right under the gap is the 10 and 20 period moving average, and then the 126 gap up here. This one's right around 123, 123 and a half, something like that. I still think these gaps are probably going to get filled. Now, if Nvidia starts breaking this level, then the risk is we just come down here to 75. If, again, you get the possible head and shoulders with Nvidia, and again, you get the possible head and shoulders with the S&P. If we bounce with Nvidia, and NASDAQ, by the way, if we bounce with Nvidia, then NASDAQ is probably going to do it. You're probably going to come back up here to try to fill these gaps, moving towards this trend line, probably end up overthrowing it and fill the gaps. You break these levels, you break the 100 period, you break the trend line, you break horizontal support, all bets are off. Again, I don't know what the institutions are going to do. As I warned you, we're about to turn bearish at the top. On probability, that was correct. Got a shot at a bottom here. If we start breaking these levels, you're going to go a whole lot lower. If Nvidia can carve out a bottom, either here at the 100 period or we hit the 20-week, you can get a bottom. Nvidia came back, and NASDAQ, they're all coming back down. We're testing these lows. If you break them, then again, you might try to form another bottom at a little bit lower levels, right at this 97 level for Nvidia. I told you about these divergences on Nvidia, and again, that was likely going to produce a sell-off on the NASDAQ. Just as I'm warning you right now, hey, here's the trend line going back to the October 2022 low right here. You want to be watching this trend line on Nvidia that's coming in, intersecting with horizontal support as we just saw on the daily chart. That's the trend line I'm showing you on the daily chart up close. Again, we're hitting the 20-week. Maybe we bottom there, but if we don't, you got another shot at it down here at 97. We hit the low there of the week at 102. You break that level, then down here is the next level of support. So again, I'm just telling you, we might try to carve out a bottom at the 20-week moving average for Nvidia or at these levels of support. If you do, then NASDAQ might try to bottom. You break these levels, that's extremely bearish. I think you might buy some time and go back up and fill the gaps before we get a bigger sell-off. Shot at a bottom, as I continue to say. No guarantee. Comes down to is the support levels, like at the 20-week that we're testing, and these trend lines, they come into play. Remember, Bitcoin broke its trend line. It's right at it right now. S&P slightly breaching it. NASDAQ, again, testing the 100 period right below. You have, again, this horizontal support level. Okay, this horizontal support level at 18,464. Then you've got the gap fill right here, 18,653, right below the 100 period moving average. We were just above it there 3 days ago. If you break these levels, which I think you're probably going to do, then you've got your 61-point Fibonacci just below that right there at the 18,000, just under 18,400 area. If we continue to sell off and don't bottom, then you've got your 200 and you've got your horizontal support down here at 17,000. The question is, are we going to just continue to sell off and do it? Are we going to bounce and go back up and fill the gap up here first, try to bottom out, go back up and fill the gap, and then come back down? You'll get a larger divergence between S&P and NASDAQ if you do see that scenario play out. The decision's about to be made. I'm not going to make that decision. You're not going to make that decision. Institutions with all the money are going to make that decision if they stop selling the buy the dip crowd and comes back in. Profit taking for the shorts comes back in, and that will push prices back up, start carving out a bottom. The $64,000 question is, will we bounce off these levels, or maybe the 100 and have the low hold, or go a little bit lower and have these other levels hold? Or are we going to have to get a bigger break first? And it's really the institutions going to make that decision. It'll all start turning back to bullish, then a shot at the rebound to go back up and fill the gap. Now, I was talking to you about this fifth leg lower. Now, if we get it on the 60-minute chart, and the target level for the head and shoulders comes into play. NASDAQ was down 2.44%, down 472 points. Oh, gee, where have we heard that? Back over here, when we had that first drop of 500 points, I told you you're going to see more of that. You're going to see that. Again, 500-point big drop right there, rally back up, another big drop right there, another big drop right there, and another big drop today. A shot at a bottoming process. Again, here you can see the head and shoulder target level. Look at the head and shoulders. Beautiful head and shoulders on the NASDAQ playing out here. We rose back up, and I told you the gap resistance was where? At the back test of the trend line, the neckline for the head and shoulders pattern. So I told you if we do go too low, that we might form a inverse head and shoulders pattern surrounding that same neckline. Kind of interesting. And whoops, sorry about that. We just overthrew it just a little bit there. Again, 61.8 Fibonacci, the 18,400 area, the gap fill 18,653. Horizontal support, not seen on this chart, but just directly below, right there at that same area, 18,400 area. Momentum rolled over. I warned you yesterday that it was at an extreme and it was likely going to roll over. We're going to turn off of gap resistance. We did exactly do that. The question is, are we going to move to a new low, or are we going to try to bottom out? S&P slightly breaching the trend line here, and again, it may go lower. It's tried to bounce around that trend line. NASDAQ's right at the trend line of the 100 period moving average. Again, the gap fill here at this 18,464 area. You've got your horizontal support from this level right over here at the 18,000, the low 18,400 area, and again the 61.8 Fibonacci in our trend line. Should we break the trend line, you have these other levels of support where we might try to bounce. So again, Bitcoin did just that. It broke it, and then it bounced. It got back above it, and if it do, you can go back and fill the gap. We may just bounce off the trend line if our low from Tuesday can hold. We'll be watching. But again, we're at a trend line of support. Again, trend lines do change. Maybe we have to go down to extremes on the RSI before we bottom out, maybe there. Or again, if we get something uglier, if the institutions continue to sell, our 200 period, our horizontal support levels then come into play with these head and shoulder patterns. The question is now, do we get another bottom in this area somewhere, or do we break and come down to this area or closer to the 200 period moving average? I told you we turn off gap resistance on NASDAQ. We did that. I told you we would turn off a gap fill off the S&P. We did that. It's a waiting game. You know, are we going to try to carve out a bottom or not?